Welcome to our April City Currents, a dialogue about Durango where you can join in the conversation with your questions. As we open today with a song by 2020 Fort Lewis graduate Kara Elizabeth Kaiser.
Back to Durango. Back to Durango.
My guest this time is Kevin Hall, the Managing Director of Community Development. Welcome, Kevin.
Good morning, Jose.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a background? I know you've been in Durango for a long time, but for some of the viewers who may not know, just kind of talk a little bit about your ventures into the city of Durango and kind of how your career has progressed since being here.
Sure. I've been in Durango for 23 years and been with the city of Durango for nearly 20. Started my career with the Parks and Recreation Department doing project development, capital projects, and kind of have been wending my way through the organization since. I've been with the community development function since 2015, and certainly with the city manager's office the last handful of years. A lot of different projects, a lot of different experiences.
So what's your most memorable project right now so far? So if you look back at the career that you've had so far and you look back, you're like, that was one of the either more challenging or one of the funnest projects I've got to work on.
Well, I think both combined. Doing the open space acquisition for the mountain parks in the early 2000s, mid-2000s was really a fantastic opportunity for the community as well as for myself.
Gotcha. And when you look at community development, I think, we have a lot of pressure in the city and the organization to look at affordability, attainable housing, looking at workforce housing and affordable housing. And then you even look at trying to develop in Durango. Everybody always says sometimes you get those comments, it's so hard to develop here. And how do you deal with that in your staff? How do you take a look at those types of comments and really try to still continue to be that community partner?
Well, I really think it relates to balance and trying to recognize how the private sector sees our regulations and their purposes, and then working with the staff to ensure that they understand there needs to be a balance. So every day we're talking about how can we be a better way of collaborating, how can we be partnering with the community.
Talk a little bit about that balance. What are those two issues that you're really trying to balance when a developer comes in and looking to develop here in Durango?
Well, I think often for the planning staff, the community development staff, we see the book of regulations, and a lot of the staff will see it as that is my marching orders. Enforce these regulations, make sure they get met. Well, for the community who steps into the department to do a development, what they find is the regulations are often very difficult to meet in order to be affordable.
And when you say difficult to meet, can you give a little more just kind of background into that?
Well, building a street, putting in curb and gutter, putting in sewer and water pipes, very costly. Mm-hmm. And the staff, while that does have to happen, often there's ways to work with the developer in partnership to see those things come to fruition.
So when you look at the city of Durango, where do you see some of the areas that are going to probably start really growing or we're seeing some activity or interest in?
Well, certainly the urban core with our Urban Renewal District, I know we'll talk about that in a bit, but downtown Maine is an area that we're going to see change in the coming years. Certainly if you move outwardly, the La Posta Road area is an area that there's a lot of interest in seeing some business development occur.
Gotcha. So kind of going in there, what do you see as the top three issues that are facing the Community Development Department?
Well, again, I think we just spoke to a little bit about the affordability issue in housing and finding ways to work with the community collaboratively to find policies that meet the council's goals, as well as find some units on the ground that are affordable to our community is one of them. Certainly revisioning downtown. Right now it's very auto-centric. Narrow sidewalks, but it's very clear in the last couple of years that there's a need to have more room for the pedestrians, more room for dining and shopping, and we're really looking forward to working with the Business Improvement District as well as the business owners to find some solutions down there.
Gotcha. And is it unusual for the city to have a business development coordinator? Isn't this something that's often best left to the private sector?
Well, I think the best practices around certainly the state of Colorado and elsewhere is to have somebody who serves as a liaison between the regulatory function of the city and the business community, and that's really one of the primary roles of our business development coordinator. Take those hard questions, help guide some of the processes.
So talk a little bit about that, because one of the things when we look at some of our development areas, we have areas where we partner with the county. when we look at regulating some of the development. Can you talk a little bit about those areas and kind of how we work with other entities, specifically La Plata County, to make development happen?
Sure. In fact, the edges of town are some of the busiest parts of the community for development. And working with the county, we do have a joint planning area which has, in most cases, the plans and the rules overlap pretty well. But it does require, if it's outside the city limits, to work with the processes of the county and the city collectively. And that can be arduous at times, and that's another role for the business development coordinator to really help guide through those what are sometimes challenging processes.
Gotcha. Kind of going back, people often say, or even will kind of have their concerns that what happens if Durango turns into another Aspen or Vail? What's your response to that? I know we have a lot of people, even when I come on board, as we're looking at making decisions, they're like, please don't let it turn into Aspen and Vail. Keep Durango the unique community area that it has. So what do you say about that?
Well, that is indeed one of our additional challenges, and that is to maintain the character of this community. I think there's some very different aspects to this community versus those that you mentioned. We have a college. We have kind of a traditional base, a cross-section of community with jobs as well as housing and a variety of activities. Some of those mountain towns are very ski-oriented centric, and here I think we have a much broader base, and I think the college is a key to that.
Something new for Durango is the Urban Renewal Authority, also known as the Durango Renewal Partnership. Its first project is the Midtown Renewal Effort. How will this impact businesses and buildings in that area?
Well, because we have the Midtown Plan in place, that does allow the URA and the organization to work on infrastructure improvements that are cost shared. And I think that's the key, is often we've seen projects that don't move forward because they're not pencilable, if you will. And in this case, the URA can step forward and assist with some of the infrastructure costs, depending on the agreement that is established.
Oh, perfect. So let's talk a little bit more about Kevin now. A little more of a personal note. Favorite Durango restaurant?
Oh, there's so many good ones, and it changes from time to time, but certainly like to hang out at Ernie's on a nice summer evening.
Nice. And speaking of weekends, where would we find you?
Probably out on the mountain bike trails.
Mountain bike trails. So how often do you bike?
Well, it depends, but it's probably most days.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then last question, favorites music. What type of music do you listen to?
Well, Jose, I pretty much roll through the decades and listen to what's playing at the time, so I'm not going to say there's one favorite, but right now I'm listening to stuff that was released in the last couple of years. 20 years ago, I was listening to that. So
Nice, yeah. Nice. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us here on our City Currents edition.
Thank you, Jose.
I'd like to close this edition of City Currents with a reminder that the 2021 Multimodal Transportation Plan update is underway. The vision of this plan is to create a fully connected transportation network that provides for an outstanding transit, bicycling, walking, and rolling community in Durango. You can learn more about this effort and get involved by visiting durangogov.org/MTP. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another edition of City Currents. You can call in your questions about city government to our City Currents hotline, 970-375-5091. Or send us an email at citycurrents@durangogov.org. Thank you for watching us, and be sure to join us next time.